So we're going to get going in a few minutes here. A few folks are still popping in. All right, got to the point where I can't really breathe very well in that thing. So I'm taking mine off. More power to you, Matt and Nicole. So we're gonna give folks a few minutes and then we're gonna get started at our new Essay Daily Salon, which we're really excited to have you here for. So if you need to grab a beverage of your choice, now is a fine time to do that, or get you some Iberian ham or some Iberian ham chips, which is what these are behind me. And I'll just kind of mention here, yeah, just keep yourself muted if you are here. You can have the video on if you're in the mood to, or not, as you prefer. We're probably, I don't know, a medium-sized group, so it shouldn't be too crazy. This is being recorded. We're gonna put this, I don't know, online at some point to do something with it. We'll archive it because I know there are a lot of people that couldn't make it tonight that wanted to get the opportunity to hear Nicole and Matthew here. But it's really nice to see you all. I'm happy to have people here to chat with and to talk about. I will say we're going to try to do one more salon that'll be coming up toward the end of the month, which is going to feature some folks from the March Pladness tournament that's going on. It kicked off today. So it'll be, I'm not sure who it's going to be yet, but we're going to have some folks come on to talk about like writing for music, and also being tweeted at by Shirley Manson from Garbage, which is what happened to one of our essayists today. So we basically, her life has been made. Shirley Manson was really excited about her essay, which was actually just a really, really cool way to start off the tournament. So if you don't know what March Pladness is, you should go over to marchxness.com. If you're interested in the essay, and I imagine a lot of the people that are here are interested in the essay, then it's kind of like Essayist Christmas is how some people talk about it. It's a March Madness style single elimination tournament of 64 essays about 64 songs. And this year it is the grunge era. Not necessarily all grunge songs, but songs that have some aspect of grunge that will be playing off this month. And it's a lot of fun. It moves really fast. And so there'll be 8 essays a day for the first 8 days. So if you want to go check it out, you can go to marchxness.com. Nicole has been a player in the past. Matt, you've never joined us for Xness, but I feel like this is in the kinds of things that you would enjoy doing.
I definitely want to do it in future, Ander Monson.
Okay.
Ander, can I share my screen so I can show people the Twitter? It's very exciting.
Yeah, let me make you, I think I'll make you a
you can make me a co-host. Or I've learned the only reason to do anything these days is to learn new things about Zoom.
Yes.
And I've learned something on the security. If you go to security and you can say something like share screen, you can say allow participants to share screen, and suddenly voila, we could all go nuts. But maybe that's a power not all of our friends can handle. I don't know.
Yes.
But look at this awesomeness. Hold on, make sure I'm on the right page. I am. Share screen. Then this is where the lighting really needs some help. Okay, ready? Look at this. From the band Garbage. Says, hello, replying to, thank you for your loving essay. It moved me deeply. SX. They are already tweeting about March Madness on day one. Now I have some complaining to do called I wasn't allowed to do March Pladness, even though I'm from Portland. Well, I lived in Portland and I should have had first dibs, but I did March Badness, which was also very fun and worth it. But you have to, so many people are itching to play these fine games that not everyone can participate every year. But I have decided, along with Ander and Megan's youngest and oldest child, Athena, that it will be Temple of the Dog will win. And I think that's probably right. You think?
No.
No.
I think that's not going to happen, but it
No?
might.
All right.
It might. Like
never
crazy things happen in this tournament.
Is Elena Passarea playing?
No.
Okay, then it's up for grabs.
Yes.
But David Turkel is playing.
Yes.
Okay.
Oh,
Yeah.
oh,
Her
oh,
now
oh.
husband. They finally
Did they
made the
finally
decision.
get properly hitched?
Yes, they announced that earlier today, I think. They've been married for a year, but they got hitched in Vegas in true classic fashion. But if you're interested in this, like there's also they run a podcast, she and Justin St. Germain, called I'll Find Myself When I'm Dead, which is a podcast about the literary essay, which is also of significant concern, I think, to people that are interested in the things we'll be talking about today. And they ran their episode this morning was their kind of preview and breakdown of the Pladness bracket. And it's actually a really awesome podcast. It's one of the ones that I listen to. It's called I'll Find Myself When I'm Dead, when you can get it all the usual places. But it's really great. They're both really great writers and have a very lively, kind of exciting conversations that are occasionally pretty half-assed and a lot of fun. But we should get to actually the things that we're here to talk about. Although I think we're all perfectly willing to indulge whatever swerves that we want to take. I would like to just introduce briefly Matthew Gavin Frank and Nicole Walker, who are two writers that I've known for a while and I like a lot. And we're really excited about both of your new books. And I'm going to ask you to read just for a few minutes from the books, and then we're going to take questions. I've got questions, a bunch of stuff I'm interested in talking about, but we also welcome questions from our audience, many of whom are practitioners, interested in talking about, like this is a sort of less of like a kind of random public reading and more a bunch of like-minded people interested in talking shop. So I think this is a good opportunity to do that. And I'm going to invite Matt first, just to read a little bit from his new book, and then we'll have Nicole read for a few minutes. Matt, I'm going to spotlight you. I've become very good at spotlighting.
Am I? Oh God!
Ooh, I don't know what that is.
Boom.
I'm huge on my own screen. Yeah, so I'll read a section from Flight of the Diamond Smugglers. It's a really this won't be more than 5 minutes. How to preface this? So in 2016, I was hanging out on like the northwest corner of South Africa, close to the Namibian border. It was an area like colloquially known as the Diamond Coast, because much of the landscape was dominated by De Beers controlled diamond mines and the adjacent and cloistered diamond towns. So beginning only in 2007, some of the doors to these previously closed off towns started throwing themselves open to the public since like 1925. So these towns were like closed off to the general public and cloistered by De Beers across generations. And so as like a natural trespasser, the area was actually known as like the Forbidden Zone. As a natural trespasser, I wanted to like trespass onto the Forbidden Zone, get in there and just kind of see what it was like and talk to some people. And I had no idea I was gonna write anything about it. There was incident and accident that occurred. And so I found out that a lot of the folks there who were laboring for De Beers, in order to feed their families, they had to engage in kind of the ancillary industry of diamond smuggling. And so a lot of folks began training carrier pigeons to smuggle diamonds out of mine property and things. And De Beers eventually caught wind of this and infiltrated local governments and had it declared illegal to raise a pigeon in the area, and went even further to say that if you were carrying a gun and you had and a pigeon crossed your path and you did not shoot that pigeon, you could be fined. You could be arrested, you could be fined, you could be like evicted from the town, or like mine security was given unspoken leeway to, exact like brutal punishments unto the body. And so that happened oftentimes too. In this brief scene, sitting with a young diamond miner named Msizi on a beach at dusk. Not a nice beach. And he is showing me his trained carrier pigeon, Bartholomew. Bartholomew is the pigeon. This piece is kind of based on what he's talking to me about. Bartholomew wakes into the sort of circular white light that one might mistake for the sun if it weren't surrounded by all that darkness. Msizi's headlamp sweeps the pigeon's body like a searchlight as he quietly opens the coop door, the hinges of which he greases daily with sunflower oil to protect what he believes to be the bird's sensitive ears from the squeaking. Bartholomew has the coop to himself. He's Msizi's last bird, the others having been confiscated by mine security in response to the directives of Mr. Lester. Their heads stepped on or twisted off, their bodies ripped by knife or bullet, or so the rumors go. The sky over Namaqualand turns milky, but the sun is not yet up. Inside, in the kitchen, Msizi's mother opens the cupboard, traces her finger through the dust on the second shelf from the top. Her shirt pulls up, and her spine presses from her skin like a stack of nickels. She assesses the plastic bottle of sunflower oil and frowns. Msizi thinks she's prettiest when frowning. That doesn't mean he looks forward to disappointing her. She wants to yell at her son, but says nothing, permits him his superstitions, his tenderness toward his final bird, her final chance at wealth and a pilgrimage south toward some nicer area of the Cape where houses have shingled roofs and windows that close. The kitchen light flickers, turns itself off before turning itself back on. Beneath the orange streetlight in front of their house, the dead bat-eared fox, flattened there since last Friday, decomposes. The insects have taken its eyes and the red dust has pooled in the sockets. Onto these dunes in miniature, the wind has drawn ripples. In the adjacent dead palm, the abandoned and dried nest of some long gone bird now houses giant crystals of salt. Down the street, that pile of white cinder block overgrown with red mosses, also dead, used to be a house. Per his neurotic ritual, Msizi hugs the bird to his chest and says good morning 3 times fast. Msizi replaces the bird in the coop and speaks his name before heading inside for breakfast. Msizi eats his jungle oats, the energy champion, and the shadow of his spoon looks large on the inside wall of the dining room that is also his bedroom and his brother's bedroom. He coughs before swallowing the oats, larded with a little milk and medium fat margarine. In this way, he nourishes himself for a day spent digging for diamonds at the local mine. He coughs and swallows and coughs as the sun turns Bartholomew's feathers orange. The bird refuses, given the photopic spectral prowess hiccuping in his genes, to close his eyes against the brightness. It's like he's trying to hoard the light for those hours spent packed into a metal lunchbox next to a halved peach chutney sandwich and a single serving bag of Simba tomato sauce flavored potato chips. Bartholomew, like most other pigeons, is so adaptable, so good. He knows when to coo and when to be quiet. Though mine workers have to pass through the X-ray machine upon entering and leaving the mine, South Africa has made it illegal to over-radiate a person. So the machines light up and whir in the same way, whether or not they're conducting an actual X-ray. In this way, the mine worker never knows whether his innards or the innards of his lunchbox are being scanned or not, whether they've been mildly poisoned and mapped or given a placebo. Mzizi finishes his breakfast, cups his hands over the bird's wings. Mzizi again assesses his companion's dimensions perfectly, leaving just enough room for his body in the lunchbox, just enough for him to lie his head on the foil of the potato chip bag. As he closes and latches the lid, the bird's heart quickens. Mzizi kisses his mother, lets his brother sleep before walking. His body stutters with each stone he steps on. He passes beneath the town's sole working street lamp, the electricity illegally tapped into by the neighborhood's residents, who embody what an anonymously written local newspaper op-ed dubbed the malign ingenuity of the poor and the damned. For the 8th day in a row, Mzizi passes that dead, eyeless fox. It's starting to depress him. I'll leave it there.
Awesome. Thank you. Well read also, unsurprisingly. Nicole, I'd like you to read a little bit and then we'll get to some conversation in.
Awesome. I would like some conversationing. No one knows what happens in the light of a Zoom room. One of the nice things about reading from this book, I just got these reading glasses. One of the nice things, they're a little bit less powerful than these, but just vaguely. One of the nice things about this book and this book tour is whatever happens, we'll just make it into the next book. This book's called Process Meats, Essays on Food, Flesh, and Navigating Disaster. As usual, we were, Matt and Ander and I were going to meet here at 5:45, and at 5:55, I'd finally figured out the link. I feel like even though it's Zoom and you're at your house and you could be well prepared and had, a brief massage and some reflective time before the reading, you're still running around like a chicken with your head cut off. So I'm just going to read the introduction because I think it's 5 minutes. And then you won't have to listen to me tell you what the book is supposedly about. I also think that writing introductions is a disastrous task. So we'll see. We'll see how this one turned out. You always write the introduction after the book, right? So here it is. Baby's cheeks are delicious. We nibble and kiss. We say, I'm going to eat you up in a growly, hungry voice. Think of all the food that went into making that baby. How much butter the pregnant woman ate, how many leafy greens with that folic acid. Would that baby taste like Swiss chard? It's a daunting choice, deciding to have kids. When I was growing up, my mom was an establishing member of the Zero Population Growth Society. In the doctor's office, at the mall, in the grocery store, whenever we saw a family of 8 kids, the eldest daughter managing the little kids, she would loudly whisper, the planet can take so many humans. In a state where women marry youngest and have babies soon after, having kids isn't a decision. It's an expectation. To be in Utah is to be pregnant. So I left for Oregon to attend college, ASAP. After leaving Salt Lake for even more progressive than my mom's city of Portland, I was not having kids anytime soon. In Portland, it was well established there were already too many people on the earth. Every house had a Diet for a Small Planet cookbook on the countertop next to the homegrown bean sprouts. In Portland, it was a given that food choices were political. Even in the late 90s, liberal Portlanders knew that eating red meat harmed the environment. I stuck a sticker to the bumper of my not so eco-friendly Isuzu Rodeo that read, "Cows kill salmon," because of the way grazing cows trotted through small creeks, turning spawning grounds into muddy, grazable land, even though I occasionally ate burgers at McMinnon's. Growing up in Salt Lake City, I was a picky eater, but after Portland's mind-opening ways, now I eat and make almost anything. I like to cook. Soufflés and beef roulade, cassoulet, and lengua tacos. I love sauces, gravy béarnaise, beurre blanc, bechamel, raspberry jam compote, and beef broth reduction. I blow through a pound of butter on a regular dinner party night and 3 pounds for Thanksgiving. Fish. I love branzino, sea bass, trout, salmon. We eat chicken without skin, chicken thighs with. I love turkey and I love filet mignon. It's not very ladylike to eat an 8-ounce filet mignon covered in béarnaise. It's really not ladylike to eat a 22-ounce prime rib. My sisters and I have a capacity to eat an enormous amount of red meat. My parents fostered a kind of feminism. Choose what you want for dinner. Choose whether or not you want to have kids. As much as my father may have wanted a son, he didn't complain about how many daughters he had. All 3 of us were told we could be anything we wanted to be. My mother, who eventually divorced my dad, not so much for his infernal drinking as for his clumsy cheating, reminded my sisters and me never to rely on the money of men. So, like boys, we ate huge steaks. Like men, each of us got big jobs. We are not the tiniest people you've ever met. At least, my mom said, you stopped at 1 or 2. Kids, I thought she meant, or maybe she meant steaks. When I returned from Salt Lake from Portland for grad school, even my grad school friends were having kids. Maybe there is something in the water, but the part of me that wanted to have kids that had lain dormant in the back of my brain erupted. Now, when I saw families of 8, instead of thinking planet, I thought, can I borrow one? I've always liked kids. I've always thought I'd be a good mom. How could I have known that deciding to have kids is one thing, having them and raising them is quite another? But if being a good mom meant wringing your hands over every decision and wondering how the planet could survive your individual desire to procreate, then I was already the best mom in the world. Processed Meats is a book about wanting everything and knowing there's a price to pay for getting it. Processed because hand-wringing and overthinking and mechanized worry. Meats because these babies and those steaks are so delicious and there's only one life to live and we should dig in and enjoy it. Well, maybe we should forego the red meat, but keep the béarnaise because the sauce is always the best part. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. So yeah, let's get into some conversation. And the thing I'd like to start with is maybe asking both of you to talk a little bit about the movement in your essays. Like, I think there's so much of it that happens in both of these books, which is kind of typical, I think of your styles in general. But like, especially the movement from like the kind of like the macro to the micro and back, which is also a way of saying from like the public to the private, or maybe from the reverse. And it happens, you know, I mean, I think a lot of writers do that, but it happens with such velocity, and often in both of your work, that I'm wondering if you would talk a little bit about, I guess, the technique, if you have one. How much of that is sort of like a function of the way that you are drafting this in the first place? How much of it is a function of like revision? How much of it is kind of accident that you sort of like run into? But I would love to hear how you like how that gets like modulated or moderated, because I think it's so much fun to listen to and read on the page.
Yeah. I mean, for me, I'm like a maximalist with early drafts. I mean, some might accuse me of being just like a maximalist, period. I mean, even with final drafts, at least on the sentence level sometimes. But so this book is like, right now it's like a lean 204 pages or something, but at its largest, it was close to 800. And so I like craft wise, I mean, like the inspiration for the book was just kind of like accidental. I happened to be in a bar in the Diamond Coast, in a bar called Diamond Hunters, and I was drinking brandy with a former diamond diver who was sitting next to me, who started telling me stories, and I was like, holy shit, this is fascinating. And I started like writing down what he was saying on the back of a gas station receipt, and that's pretty much how the book started. But as far as this jockeying between the larger context and then the personal stuff, I just had so much of both when I was like going back and forth because I didn't necessarily know where the book was going. And as I was drafting some of the scenes that took place in real time in South Africa, as I was writing these, you know, back here in Michigan, I like forced myself to stay in those scenes and write so far beyond their endings. For a ridiculous amount of time. So I would like stay in the scene and I would be in that place, and then I would force myself to look up and then look down and then look up and then look down and write about soil and write about bugs and write about the components of the soil and write about the bugs that thrived on those components in the soil. And then I would look up to the cosmos and consider the weather and consider the satellites. And just go on and on and on. And so, you know, of course I got 800 pages, but then when I went back to cut, some of the stuff was allowed to stick. And so some of that stuff in the soil was allowed to haunt the scene at hand. And some of that stuff in the cosmos, very little, was also allowed to haunt the scene at hand. So it's like secretly a really like simple thing. I just kind of like stay there and look up and look down for a while. And then just keep writing obsessively and then cut obsessively and retain a couple of those things.
I mean, just talk a little bit more about how you made like a decision, like what gets kept of all of that. I mean, so if you're generating all that additional material for every potential scene, how do you choose like what, you know, what's the appropriate ratio of inclusion?
Yeah, that's Nicole. Do you want to like talk about this?
Go with your ratio, and I'll go with your zooming and zooming in and zooming out with my accordion.
Yeah,
I really want to know. Well, okay, I'll go because
okay.
I have a thought, and then go back and tell us how you, because I'm inspired by what you were saying about length, and that you write and write and write, and it's a, you know, there is a force behind it, it feels, and that you do look. That's one of my favorite ways of thinking, is to look at the granular and the microscopic, and then look at the cosmic and the, you know, as Timothy Morton calls it, the hyper objects. Look really far up and say like, okay, what does this connect to? And what happens, right, is you get, I think this connects to Anders' question about pacing, that there's some sort of momentum that happens when you're doing this sort of zoom look that I think for some readers might, from some of my readers, might be disorienting, right? That you're like zooming up, zooming down, but those connections to me are like the serendipitous moments where I'm like, that's insight. That's how the world works. And if I'm not doing this zooming up and down, I don't get that sight. But there's, you know, so the more you do it, right, the longer the pieces get, the further you go. When I write, you know, I'm like, I abhor the adage, write what you know. I think that's not true. But of course, I always start with whatever I'm looking at outside my kitchen window. And it's always, you know, clumps of dirt. And again, dirt, it's always, it begins there. It seems for Matthew as well as for me. And that idea of, okay, well, I know a little bit about dirt, but I don't know that much about dirt. And then you go out and find some more, right? And that's another way that you then start tracking in more and more material. And that can be, I mean, to me, that's the process and the progress of the book. So now I want to go back to Matthew and ask, so then how do you pull back from that? Because I'd love to know.
I mean, some of it's really simple and easy. So like, there was like a 40-page engagement of the history and evolution of the lobotomy in the book, and I needed to cut it down, so it was really easy just to slice those 40 pages out of it. But some of the, I mean, I guess, so I have a background in poetry, and I mean, is it silly to say like I still feel like I kind of like understand like a weird dreamy poetic logic, and just the fact that the things can converse with one another in ways where one thing complicates the other thing simply by proximity. And I wonder how I can like engage that sort of like proximal chiming, I suppose, in a condensed space. so if I want to write about, the endurance of personal grief, or I want to write about a feeling of estrangement or loneliness, or I want to write about that gulf that W.G. Sebald talked about existing between humans and animals. Like, what's that quote? Like, humans and animals regard one another from across a gulf of mutual misunderstanding or something. Like how am I going to engage that gulf? Like, what am I going to fill that with? How am I going to bridge it? What am I going to have to talk about? Maybe in just like one paragraph, rather than 40 pages, in order to like bridge the gap between a sense of endurance of personal grief and watching what a pigeon's body goes through in order to smuggle diamonds, and watching what a diamond miner's body goes through with damn near no recompense to make billions for a corporation. And so I guess I'm just trying to find those bridge ingredients that I can engage concisely, but that bear the illusion of seamlessness. And maybe it's the Voyager, a meditation on the Voyager golden record in one scene, and maybe it's a carrion beetle that I see like threading a bunch of broken glass curbside in another. But I'm trying to find these ways of concisely bridging these sorts of gulfs between subject matter with a thing, like a record or a bug.
What I respond to particularly is this, that there's a general excitability about the universe, right? Dinty Moore was interviewing me via email the other day, and he said, how do you keep your spirits up when, in climate crisis and when you're writing about climate stuff? And I'm like, it's not like me, or it's the world. Like, the world itself is still pretty exciting, and making those connections and seeing the connection between how people behave in terms of getting their vaccine, or in terms of wearing masks, to how they behave in terms of not wanting to have to give up driving their cars, or whatever these connections are. Those things excite me, and excitability, maybe that's just a screen for happiness, but I do find great joy in those moments where there is that connection between the things you say, Matthew, like the between the small and the big, or the inside of a pigeon and the long history of lobotomies, right? That you're like, oh, I didn't know that. And so it's this stimulus itself of synapses seems to be at least enough to keep me going, even if it's not truly the definition of happiness.
I think I want to we have a question in the chat that we can get to in a little bit, Matt, if you want to talk about that. But I'd like to hear you both like talk a little bit about like the pleasure of like trespass or transgression. Because like trespassing showed up in kind of like in Matt, in your like kind of intro, and it feels like that's kind of part of the pleasure that Nicole, you take, that you both obviously take in these like sort of like part of it is like pulling unlike things together into one thing, kind of moving back and forth. Part of it is like this like almost self-conscious pleasure with like language and with like riffing. And then part of it is sometimes just like talking about shit that other people aren't talking about, or going places like that you're not allowed to go, or told that you're allowed to go. And like there's like a sense of like danger in both of your work in different ways. I wonder if you would talk a little bit about that, like how that's useful to you, how you court it, if that's something that you actually like enjoy. Like, were you breaking and entering kind of people as kids? Did you sneak into places?
Yeah, I feel I feel like 12 out of my 14 juvenile arrests were for trespassing, and so yeah, I guess I was a trespasser as a kid, and I was always curious about places that I suppose wanted to keep me out. I mean, I feel like as a writer, like both actually and metaphorically, I like how do I respectfully trespass without claiming some kind of ownership, without wrecking something, without doing damage, and it's slippery and it's difficult. I think like, I mean, you pointed me to the question in the chat, and I feel like this kind of involves the question kind of like it involves or demands like an engagement of metaphorical trespass onto the body of another thing, onto the pigeon, and there's danger in that too, I guess. And I suppose for better or for worse, I guess I am attracted to like some sort of electric danger with that, some sort of risk taking, both with, you know, actually like going to a place I'm not supposed to be, or like trying something weird in the writing process that I probably can't get away with. But should I try and see if I can make this craft thing happen or something? But with it, yeah, I guess like with anthropomorphizing the pigeons, trespassing onto the body of another species, I guess, and trying to empathize with them or commune with them. How dare I in a way. I was doing an event with Kathleen Rooney a few nights ago, who wrote that novel about Cherami, the pigeon, and Major Whittlesey, and she is a she was so pro anthropomorphization, because she feels as if we don't impose ourselves, at least emotionally, onto the bird, for instance, onto the pigeon, and if we don't see ourselves in the pigeon, that gives us an excuse to even further other the pigeon and do damage to the thing, if we don't kind of impose human qualities on it. And that was really interesting, right? Like a really interesting perspective, I think. And I don't know what I'm doing with that. I feel as if my obligation is I want to do as much studying of the pigeon's anatomy as I possibly can. I want to do as much studying of the pigeon's expressions of pain as I possibly can. I want to do as much studying of the human story of the pigeon in various mythologies across time, culture, and region as I can, before I get into writing about it. But I feel as if anthropomorphizing, in a way, is inevitable, because I am beholden, however sadly, to the prison of my own firing synapses, to the human brain. I want to anthropomorphize in an empathetic way without claiming ownership, I suppose, of another thing's way of feeling.
Yeah, I think of the essays I've written about animals and how mainly I think they're smarter than us, in some ways, right? That they have their own intelligence, but that, Matthew, you're absolutely right, that to care about anything on the earth requires some sort of projection of your own feelings, right? Your own understanding of how the world works. If not, then you're just hermetically sealed in your own bubble, as we are in our pandemic times, and you're cut off, right? You're cut off from that feeling. So I really appreciate what you're saying and what Kathleen Rooney says, that there is something about imagining another perspective from the point of view of animals. My daughter asked the other day, well, what do you think Bear the dog is thinking? And I'm like, well, I don't know what he's thinking. He's his own animal. He has his own, understanding of relationships and perspective. But on the other hand, I'm always like, hi, Bear, do you really like these biscuits? That like we project so we can communicate. And I think that there is a kind of communication that happens between us and between animals, that because we have our words, we project on them. But when I was writing this, when I was editing Process Meats for Torrey House Press, they said, okay, you gotta go in there and explain, like you talk about all of your, environmental concerns, and yet you still eat meat. Like, what are you talking about? How can you justify that? And this, I think, goes along with that idea of trespass, is there's something irritating, I think, about me where I'm the kind of person that will walk wherever I want to go, and then I'll turn back and see that there was a no trespassing sign. That calling out, like when I really screw up, it always happens after I've done it. And so in thinking about, eating meat and continuing to eat meat, or, cutting back, but never fully giving up, I justify it in terms of, that's how my family does it. In the part I read, my sisters and I were like, we're eaters, we're chefs. Matthew knows this from his Barolo book, right? Like being a chef is part of, not limiting yourself. But of course, part of, I guess the larger way I rationalize it is that limitations, I don't think necessarily lead to new ways of thinking. And I am hoping to find a new way to become to become more environmentally conscious, or more making what I think is environmentally impactful effective. To do those things through pushing to another level, another way of thinking, is my hope. And that takes me back to Matthew's way of thinking. Maybe thinking alongside the animal is a way to push human thought, right? Or to push our own limited ways of being, is to really branch out, to trespass. And if you don't trespass, you're kept in that cycle of rationalization, of thinking that you're doing an okay thing because you're doing something else. But I really want to be able to believe and solidly think in ways that I've never thought before.
Yeah, I see Leslie made a comment in the chat about Elena Passarello's essay from the point of view of Harriet, Darwin's tortoise. And I think about that essay a lot. I remember when Elena first wrote it and read it back in it was like her first public reading of it was in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And it just like knocked me on my ass. Like I couldn't believe she got away with that. And I still think about that when I write about animals. Like every time I write about animals, I go back to that Harriet essay. I think about that Harriet essay. I think about the ways in which Elena audaciously and perfectly and beautifully imposed love and a very human sort of like, engagement of dependency onto this Galapagos tortoise. And I remember when I first started working at Northern Michigan University and editing for the Passages North Literary Journal, like I asked Elena to submit that essay because I just wanted to publish that. Because she submitted it as nonfiction, but a lot of nonfiction editors at literary journals were like, this isn't nonfiction, which is horseshit. It is. And so she sent it, and the managing editor at the time said, this is not nonfiction. And I said, horseshit, of course it is. Like, you brought me on as the nonfiction editor. I want to publish this essay as nonfiction. And he said, no, there's too much anthropomorphizing going on. And there's too much, imposing of human emotion onto this Galapagos tortoise. And I'm like, yes, but that's what it's about. It's about like the parameters of anthropomorphization, the benefits and consequences thereof to us and to animals. Eventually, like I couldn't convince him, and he threw up his hands. And then Passages North created a hybrid section that we still have, specifically because of Elena Passarello's essay. So that was the essay that begat the hybrid section of Passages North. And maybe it's okay to engage the animal in a certain way if you call it a hybrid work as opposed to a piece of nonfiction. I'm not sure, but I love that essay. I just wanted to talk about it for a second.
I've got more questions I'm definitely happy to go with here, but if people have questions you would like to hear our panelists talk about, now is a great time. Maybe one follow-up would be to ask you to talk a little bit more about like an essay that gave you that kind of permission. Like I love that, like, tracing that idea back to like Elena's essay, for instance, which is, not the first one to do that, I'm sure, but like certainly one that when I read, I was like, oh shit, yeah, you can do that. And then it's like, oh, you could do that. And I really love that kind of like moment. Are there other essays that come to mind that sort of gave you a permission that trespassed in some way that, I don't know, made you want to follow that?
Yeah, this just makes me want to call out audience members and Ander Monson himself. I really appreciate what Matthew said about working on Passages North, and working on literary magazines, I think, is to me the place where, it's just where the exciting stuff is happening. I remember at Quarterly West once we got a baggie full of breadcrumbs to publish. We're like, yes, take this, and it would go in the hybrid section. We're sure. I mean, I think at this point, with digital magazines, we could have made it happen. But Anders' essay Snow that was that we I think Julie Pagel and I published, and David Hawkins published. I think, well, maybe it was poetry at the time. I don't remember. I don't think we were really that aggravated about genre titles, but there's a kind of permission that comes, I think, from crossing genres, right? And I think, Matthew's right to say, is this an essay? And, one of my favorite projects is Robin Hemley and Leila Phillips' speculative nonfiction magazine, because what they're doing sort of is propping up that idea that nonfiction doesn't have to be relegated to the everything you can touch and smell and verify, that there is thoughtfulness to it, right? And then that includes things like anthropomorphism, and it includes things like Anders' essay Snow with the dots all through it. And I think it includes things that cross boundaries, that feel like you can't say that about your mom. I'm thinking of Steve Fellner's essays in his book, All Screwed Up, or in Cheryl Strayed's essay when she talks, and this is in the End of Process Meets, I talk about Cheryl Strayed's essay when she talks about loving her mom with a sexual burning kind of love. Like, not that she's sexually into her mother, but that the intensity of the emotion is as intense as a sexual one. And I think that kind of permission, like where can we go with our thoughts, is aligned with where can we go with our form, and where can we go with our genre. And anytime somebody says you can't do that, it feels like you definitely should do that. But again, to feel the possibilities coming to you through formal and graphical impetuses, right? Like Ander Monson's essay, I don't know if you know it, but it's prose intermediated by a lot of little dots that end up looking like snow. Ellipses, they're periods, they're all kinds of things, but they fill in space that might just be white space if it was a poem, but in this case becomes something else. And that kind of formal push, I think, pushes again against these ideas of content push, like talking about your mother at the same time you're talking about cunnilingus. You have these moments of rupture that I think was one of the reasons I think essays are the most exciting genre. I shouldn't be particular, but I am, is that I think those things happen a lot more often, that spontaneity of form crushing against content.
And I mean, Jenny Booley was very formative for me in that way too, with form colliding with content, with experiments of erasure, especially coming from a background in poetry. The Body, of course, a series of footnotes to a non-existent text. Her book, the Book of Beginnings and Endings, where the middles of pieces were erased and things were just forced to collide on the page in that way, the beginning and the end. Were just really formative sorts of pieces for me as a poet. I having a background in poetry, I really struggled to make the leap to prose, and I was looking for essays that would kind of teach me that. T. Fleischman continues to teach me in that way too, of course. Syzygy Beauty. In fact, Ander, I just found your video essay version of a portion of the I Have Been Thinking About Snow essay that I sent to my student, and she is revising a piece based on having watched that. I haven't read the revision yet, but I'm really excited. But it's funny that that came up. And so, yeah, like, I mean, it first, when I tried to make the leap to prose, I just didn't know how to be associative as a prose writer in the way that I was associative as a poet. And I didn't quite know how to say, you know, employ the same imaginative alchemy that I was like calling up in the poem. That is, maybe like taking two or more seemingly dissimilar images in the poem, or perhaps then in turn in the essay, bits of subject matter, and then laboring through research and then riffing thereon to find that perfect bridge ingredient between those seemingly dissimilar bits of subject matter. And I felt like Booley with erasure just taught me that erasure was a way to get there. Like, I mean, you're taking something away, but like that thing that is removed is also the bridge. So yeah, I mean, just to name a couple.
That's awesome. So there's two questions in the chat that I think would be interesting to talk about. One is like sort of about how pathos sort of shows up in both your books, and of which there's quite a bit of it. I mean, it's the frame for the kind of, for like the story that's like the sort of snazzier story of Matt's book. And it's also the frame for Nicole's too. I mean, there's a lot of pathos kind of like throughout all of it. Like, I'm thinking it's a little bit more obvious maybe in like Sustainability, a love story, where like, you know, we're yoking, you know, like environmental apocalypse to domestic strife more directly. And I think that would be useful. That'd be really interesting to hear you talk about that, like to the degree to which like that, does it dilute the political message, was Steve's question, or the question of Leslie's too, which I'm not quite sure how to parse, but I think is an interesting question to talk about too, wondering about, I don't know, I mean, like, I would say, is there a use for the politically correct in writing, would be maybe a more interesting way to frame that, but that may be not what they're looking for. So either of those sound fun to talk about?
That's the most fun part of this event, is that we can wrap all the questions into one answer that we wanted to talk about. But I love that question about, you know, where's the pathos, and it deeply connects to that, the question about trespass, and the question about, you know, how do you zoom in and then zoom out and bring matters of personal and private into this larger place. But there's, you know, I guess there's a part of me that still loves novels and still loves fiction, and that, you know, that traditional domestic story, I think, does engage readers, and it makes people think, oh, this is, you know, similar to me or not similar to me or my life. You know, there's a parallel that you can make, and it's heartening to me that I can make that connection on that level, and then to turn it into these more global concerns. And I guess my reason is, you know, I remember talking about global warming in the early 90s, you know, and worrying about it, but listening to people talk about it it just always made me want to die. Like, I just wanted to completely collapse in either ignorance, or might as well kill myself now, or let's just talk about something else, or apocalyptic imaginations. I think we use, you know, that as a great tool against real climate concerns. And so I was like, what brings people to other people, right? And I think it's a little bit of sharing your secrets, right? And I don't mean like, I don't think that, and many of the stories I tell are real secrets, but they're just not stuff that I don't talk about, right? With people, even my friends, we don't talk about this happened and it was really upsetting. You know, we talk about daily business, or we talk about future business. We don't talk about the past in that same way, or about really traumatic events. And so to be able to put those pretty traumatic events on the page and say, okay, this is me. Now I want to think about this meanness as a way of a template for thinking about these other hard things. And I don't want to think about these hard things either, but I do. And so maybe you'll think about it with me. So I think of it as a kind of joining together, or a kind of community that I'm building. And that's what I love about writing books, and love about this, talks like this, is I feel like we're building community and we're building conversation. So the personal becomes not so much the political, but as a conduit to the political.
I love that, this notion of the pathos chain. Just like, I mean, the individual broken heart, in a way, or just the individual heart, let's say, I mean, connecting to other hearts as a network, and art, making, in a way, hastening that. I love that. That's so cool. I feel like when I was writing this book, like, I mean, I guess my fascination with external subject matter oftentimes comes from a desperate, urgent, sad, and ultimately terribly inadequate drive to contextualize my experience of being alive, my endurance of tragedy, and things, and I oftentimes don't want to engage that head on, and write about that without trying to set it within some sort of larger context, as if it's like one small stitch in the larger tapestry, and I kind of need to engage that larger tapestry in order to make meaning of something that I've endured or something that I felt, however inadequately. I mean, it's always like chasing after meaning that is eventually and ultimately elusive. But I feel that there's something holy and pathetic, rife with pathos in that drive, that urgent and inadequate drive to contextualize one's experience by researching something else, to see what that something else, might just how that might just like slyly strike, or complicate, or add further nuance, or do nothing to the thing that you've endured, but without like holding it up to these series of mirrors and filters, and things, and without, in turn, as a writer, of course, you are by default, interacting with these other filters as a filter yourself, and without that complicated network of communing or filtration, I feel as if things remain, at least as we perceive them, stubbornly and falsely simple and singular. I guess sometimes when I'm trying to situate the personal within the public, I want to restore something that I mistakenly believe to be simple and easily digestible to its innate complexity.
That was pretty goddamn well put. We got another question coming to creative nonfiction from poetry in the chat. Is there like a poetic form energy? I mean, there's definitely like the, big R, like spontaneous overflow of emotion that I feel in both of your work. I don't know if there's a form that particularly drives it in some way.
Mm-hmm. I love that Heidi's specified, puzzles and ways of, if there's formal ways of thinking, and I think it would be too much to say that I bring in enough of that background knowledge to my essays, that I make sure that I have a turn, or that I have a repetition that calls out in the way that puzzle would. But I do think there's something about the image repetition that is really important for people who write associative essays or who write in that way that Ander described, kind of zooming out and then pulling it back in and zooming out and pulling it back in, that you need some sort of, I like to call, when I teach my students, I'm like, okay, it's like a pole in the middle of a room that you dance around, but it's not a stripper pole because that would be inappropriate. But a stripper pole that we use sort of as the thing that we can return to every time you flail out and then you come back and flail out. There's just not a better metaphor. I'm sorry. And I just one day we'll return to Portland where strippers are. There are more strip clubs in Portland, Oregon than anywhere in the world. And they would allow people of my age to do so. But that idea of using a solid foundation or a image set, as I like to call it, as the way you organize an essay, to me has been really useful. And I think that's similar to how I write poetry, which is to say, this poem can have, lives in these 4 places. And if you try to put a 5th place in, it'll fall apart. And we'll return to this part of this image and that part of that image. So in Matthew is talking about, looking at the soil and then looking at, the cosmos. In between there, you see some reflection of the cosmos in the soil and the soil in the cosmos. You keep those image strands going. And I think I learned that from poetry.
Yeah, I'm not sure. Frankly, I haven't thought about but I'm thinking about it now. I haven't thought about associating a very specific form with the ways in which I engage the essay. I was just thinking about trying to find that bridge ingredient between seemingly dissimilar images, which is something I pulled from in poetry. But I like the notion of obsessive sestinas, obsessive anything really. You could just use that verb and put it in front of any form. I don't know. Maybe I'm always trying to get from the aubade to the nocturne by way of elegy. Is that the portal? How do you get there? What's, because you can't just leap from aubade to nocturne. How do you get to the end of the day? And so I don't know. I feel like I'm, marrying different sorts of odes and shout outs to different times of days by way of different sentiments. So, hey morning, fuck, I'm sad, what can I honor? And essentially eulogize in a way that will help me understand the day enough that I could get to the night safely. Maybe that's a silly answer, but I don't know. I'm sticking with it.
Ode and eulogy, back and forth.
Great answer. I feel like we should probably wrap this up, although I have enough energy to keep going for a while, because things longer than an hour on Zoom seem like a lot. So why don't we then end with just a thank you to both of you for your time and boundless energy as expressed here. It's really been a pleasure to hear you talk and kind of wrap on this. I know. Dancer on the pole, the non-stripping pole.
Yeah. Welcome to my classroom. That's what we talk about. I want to thank everyone for coming, and Matthew, thank you for sharing the stage, and Ander, thanks for putting this together and getting some fine meat shapes behind you. I really like prosciutto. I'm making duck prosciutto next after the pancetta.
Nice.
Come to me. The pandemic's almost over. We will eat cured meats.
I wasn't lying about the lardo in my fridge. I do have juniper and rosemary cured Mangalitsa pig lardo in my refrigerator, and just slicing off of that for breakfast. I would have brought it and held it in front of this, but it's super greasy, and it would just be obscene. But Nicole, thank you. This was so great, doing this with you. Ander, thank you so much. And I just want to thank everybody for coming too. You all rock. And these sorts of conversations feel just important and necessary because we're not all sitting in some conference, hotel lobby at 3 a.m. over martinis doing this. So I miss that. And so this feels good.
For sure. And so thanks to everyone for coming. Buy their books. Their books are both out this month. Nicole's comes out, I think, technically in like a week. Matt's is already out, I think, correct?
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it just
Yeah.
came out like 5 days ago. Yeah.
Excellent. We'll do one more of these a little bit toward the end of the month about March Pladness and music writing. So tune in back for that, and we'll probably do another one in April too, because I also like these conversations, a chance to just get together and talk to interesting people with other interesting people. So thank you all, and have a good night. Go to March Pladness, read your essays, vote your heart.
Thank you, Ander. Thank you all. That was awesome.